Hi, I'm Susan, and welcome back to Tasty Cakes, where I make American baked goods one recipe at a time. It's spring here in Madrid finally, and so I thought a citrus tart recipe from the City Tavern Baking and Desserts cookbook would be a great next one to try. And as with many of these types of desserts, arguably the trickiest part is the crust, and this was no exception to the rule. I was a little bit suspect when I noticed that the process to mix it all together was a little different than the typical short crust recipe. So instead of cutting the butter into the flour and then adding the liquid ingredients, this recipe called for me to cream cold chunked butter with sugar and some orange zest, as it is a citrus crust or citrus tart. And then once it's nice and light and fluffy, you add in an egg, bring that together, and then add in the flour. I typically have trouble with eggs combining easily with creamed butter and sugar. A lot of times it comes down to the temperatures of both not being exactly the same, and that keeps them from emulsifying together. This was no exception. So what I decided to do was add a little bit of flour first to bring the base mixture together, and then added the rest of the flour. But as with short crust recipes, you don't really want to work the flour too much to develop the gluten. So I pulled it together a little bit with a spatula and then decided to finish it off with my hands. But there was so much liquid in there, and I had to keep going to make sure that the butter was nice and mixed in. It just got so disgusting and sticky. But it was what it was. There was nothing I could do about it, and I just decided to keep going. Use some kitchen utensils and arms and such to not get my entire kitchen too sticky and dirty. Got it wrapped in the plastic and into the fridge to get it chilling for it was about an hour to two, I believe. So it was nice and firm, and then it was time to roll it out. I knew that because it went in quite sticky, it was going to be quite sticky when it was time to roll out. So I was quite generous with the flour because you don't want it to stick to your surface, whatever you're rolling it out on, in this case, my table. Why? Because ultimately, you're just going to have to work the crust and the dough more than necessary. And what that does is it gives the gluten more chance to develop, which again, we don't want, because we don't want a chewy crust. We want a tender and crumbly crust. And the other thing that it does is it warms up the butter, and butter we always want to keep as cool as possible whenever we're mixing up a short crust or a pie crust. This recipe calls for an 11-inch tart pan, which is quite big. And so I had to pull the guides off of my roller because the round of dough was so large. It was quite soft. I was so afraid it was going to rip getting into the pan. It didn't, thank goodness. The one good thing is that it made it quite easy to just kind of set into the corners nice and exactly to get a super exact fit into the mold. Once I had that, then you have to cut off the extra, which the trick here is to use a back of a knife and kind of scrape it along the top so it ends up kind of making a bit of a seal, the dough with the top of the tart pan. And that just makes a nice smooth finish. I saved that extra dough to bake off later and did a little bit of cleaning while that's chilling again, because you want it as cold as possible when it goes into the oven. And then to keep those sides from scrunching down in the process of pre-baking, use some pie weights. But that tart crust was so large that I didn't have enough, so I got some extra garbanzos to the rescue, and into the oven it goes to pre-bake for about 15-20 minutes. So I got to work on the filling. And as a citrus tart, it uses 3 types of citrus: lemons, limes, and oranges. We already have some orange in the crust. And so it's time to use some lemon and lime zest. The zest of the fruit is the absolute most full of flavor part of the fruit. So I went a little bit overboard on those. And here I'm just rolling out the fruit before I juice it. If you break down those cell walls before you use the juicer, then you get more juice. So I decided to check the crust, and it's a good thing because there was butter flowing everywhere. And I ended up having to dump some extra butter off of the crust into that pan because I was so afraid that there was so much butter it was never going to bake off and it wasn't going to firm up to hold its shape to have the filling poured in. So a little bit of a crust emergency to deal with before I got back to juicing the rest of the lemons and the limes and some oranges. So with the juice done, which is a lot of juice, go ahead and check the crust again. And it turns out at this point, it looks like it's done. It doesn't have to be thoroughly cooked, but just enough to hold its shape for the filling. And then it'll finish baking when the filling's in. But as I didn't want a dripped line of butter across the floor, using a cookie sheet to pull that out and a quick check. And as I pull the aluminum foil away, it's keeping its shape. So I'm feeling pretty confident in the end it's going to be okay. Into the juice goes some sugar and then eggs. This is a crust, or a tart, and the custard filling always has eggs in it. I did a bit of a tactical mistake here. What I should have done was saved the juice in the measuring cup first, put this yogurt, which is the substitute for sour cream, in with the sugar and the eggs and whisked that together first to get it nice and smooth and not have any yogurt chunks, and then add the juice in. I didn't, and that's going to end up in some white chunks you'll see at the end of the video on the top of the tart. It doesn't make a difference in the taste. It just doesn't look so nice. So time to pull those pie weights out. Crust looks good, fixing a little bit of spots, and then you just pour the filling in, and that's it. I actually should not have poured all the filling in because there was just so much. There was almost too much, which created a very difficult transition to go from the table into the oven. I had to go super duper slowly, but I got it in there, and I don't think I spilled too much. But you never know. It was just a bit of a tight transition. So about 25 minutes later, it was done, along with a big burst of smoke coming out of the oven, because that was all of the butter that had dripped off the crust that had burned while the tart was baking. But nothing a little airflow with an open window and the hood won't fix. So in the end, this was actually quite a tasty dessert, and I really would make it again, but I would definitely make some adjustments with the crust to keep it from being the buttery disaster that it was. So thanks so much for stopping by. It's always good to see you here. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you at the next recipe.